War Eagle, my name's Andy Burcham, voice of the Auburn Tigers. This is a weekend where we all thought that we would be in Nashville, Tennessee, watching Auburn men's basketball defend its SEC tournament championship. But with the events of this week, all athletic events on campus and Auburn's athletic and university campus is now closed through mid-April. And we come to you today from the athletic director's office, Allen Greene. Thank you for joining us on an unprecedented last few days for all of us, I would think.
Yeah, you're right, Andy. Thank you, and I'm glad that we're going to have a chance to sit down and chat.
You were in Nashville, Tennessee for the SEC men's basketball tournament when things really started to unfold. So if you wouldn't mind, can you kind of take us through the timeline of what went from a men's basketball tournament to a tournament with no fans present, to an NCAA tournament with no fans present, to no SEC men's basketball tournament, no NCAA basketball tournament, men or women, and then the spring sport, the spring championships being canceled as well.
Well, what you described is something that none of us anticipated. I think we all knew in entering that tournament that there was going to be some discussion of COVID-19, and there was. So we have AD meetings every year at the men's basketball tournament, SEC basketball tournament, and so these meetings really didn't start out much different. Interestingly enough, we spent about an hour or so talking about ticket policy for people who may not feel comfortable being around large crowds at the tournament, and whether we were going to issue a press release about those who were more susceptible to the virus and their health, trying to figure out, should we refund their tickets if they didn't want to come? That was our discussion. We then paused after some time and then started talking about name, image, and likeness. And as we were going through those conversations, so this is at, by 11:30, everyone's phones are starting to go off, and Commissioner Sankey, I think, recognized that our minds were not on name, image, and likeness. We were all learning more information coming in on social media. And so we broke and then came back and continued to talk about the coronavirus and how we were going to manage it. And it all kind of runs together, Andy, and as you mentioned, we went from 0 to 100 awfully quickly. And it was one of those things where it's hard for me to articulate hours, days even, much less hours, much less minutes, because things were changing so quickly. And we talk about it's a rapidly changing environment. I don't know that the term rapidly even captures it adequately. So as we sit here right now, there's a whole bunch of things that are just spinning through my head.
Who were the decision makers with regard to SEC events?
It's a fascinating management process, if you will. So the athletic directors had an executive retreat that was intended to last for a few hours and ended up lasting all day. Commissioner Sankey did a fantastic job with navigating, and still continues to do a fantastic job of navigating this unique environment. And his leadership throughout this whole thing was as steady as can be. And the peers in the room, the other ADs in the room, understood that this was more than just about sport. Like, this was more than just about basketball. And as we learned more information, our heightened sense of responsibility to a larger community became very, very apparent. So the commissioner and the ADs had very substantial conversations as we learned new information. We would vote on certain things, and then the commissioner needed to touch base with the university presidents and chancellors. And the university presidents and chancellors are the ones who ultimately determine the direction that we're going with the support of the athletic directors. And certainly we are in constant communication with our staff, who was either already in Nashville or some back on our respective campuses, trying to just continue to learn what was going on and share, and then also try to get some outside perspective.
Did you get the idea that there was communication between conferences? Because it happened very, very quickly when one conference, it was kind of a domino effect.
Well, I would say,
or at least that's what it appeared.
I would agree. The communication with conference officials. So Commissioner Sankey, by Thursday, was having regular communication with his colleagues. On Wednesday, it was touch and go, and we were all trying to figure out. What I loved about what our league did is we have conference officials who were in contact with their contacts with professional sports leagues. So this wasn't an isolated Southeastern Conference decision or even input. We were getting input literally from all over the country. And as again, information was rolling in, there became the realization that there needed to be a more structured communication tree. And over the past few days, the commissioners had conversations and conference calls with his colleagues in the Power Five. We as ADs, along with the conference office, have had conference calls every morning every day since this all occurred. And then we internally have had conference calls with our head coaches and our executive committee, our executive staff, just to continue to provide updates. So it's this constant back and forth of communication and trying to effectively communicate, share information in an ever-changing environment, which makes things incredibly complicated.
There were 2 games at the SEC tournament on Wednesday. Mm-hmm. It was expected to be the full schedule on Thursday, and it appeared that final decision was made just hours before the first game between Tennessee and Alabama. Was that the case?
Literally 2 hours before tip. Again, so our meeting started on Wednesday. So on Wednesday, our meeting started at 9:30. On Thursday, our meeting started either at 8:30 or at 9, I can't remember. And obviously by 10 o'clock, that's about 2 hours for kick. So clearly, when we were starting those meetings on Thursday, the commissioner was he was on his conference call with his colleagues. And so we were having discussions not about canceling the tournament. We were having discussions about what do we do for the remainder of the tournament. We were still thinking that the tournament was going to continue. And when he came back in and kind of shared what was happening around the country, we quickly realized that we ought to not be thinking myopically about our own tournament, but we need to start thinking literally globally about our country and about our world. And made the decision at the time to not have, to just discontinue the tournament. And again, you've got ADs in the rooms whose coaches and players and staff are either on the way to the arena, at the arena, preparing for a game, and we're trying to make decisions very quickly to help make sure that those coaches and student athletes had as much of a heads up as possible. And certainly the circumstance was not ideal, but it was there wasn't much more that we could do based on the information that was coming in and when.
The next step was to cancel the NCAA men's and women's basketball
Right.
tournaments. How did you get that word?
Social media. One of the challenges, I think, when things are happening very rapidly, and I don't want to sit here and claim to understand all of the processes that were going on behind the scenes. Mitch Barnhart, the AD at Kentucky, is on the men's basketball selection committee for the NCAA tournament. And he was piping in from time to time to give us some updates on what was happening in New York, which is where they were stationed as they were watching conference tournament play. And we saw and saw on social media, and then we were obviously reacting from there. One of the challenges is not being able to get, I guess, a heads up so that we can make some better decisions. But I gotta believe that the leaders at the national office and decision makers, with the information that they had, which is information that we didn't have presumably, that they made the best decision that they thought was in the best interest of our country.
Were you surprised that announcement also included the spring championships?
Yes, that was a surprise also. Again, trying to make decisions very, very quickly and understanding as ADs, it became very apparent that we weren't just talking about Southeastern Conference sports, NCAA sports. We were literally talking about what was happening in our country and where the train was headed down the track. And so it was a surprise. Again, no one thought we were going to end up where we ended up over these past few days. There's still obviously stuff that needs to unfold, but just trying to make sense of the abrupt discontinuation of sport. It's emotional. It's really emotional. And I can guarantee you that no one took those decisions, and whatever decisions that we continue to make, no one is taking those lightly.
For a Samir Dowdy or an Allison Maillard, Auburn diver, for those players with Auburn baseball and softball, or a rider for Auburn's equestrian team, they now lose that opportunity to play, to finish their season, to play for a championship. You've been a student athlete yourself. That day came to a close at some point, whether it was as a student athlete or a professional athlete.
Yeah.
For them, it's come, and they really have no say-so in the matter. So what would you say to that student athlete that lost that opportunity, whose career has ended much more abruptly than any of us had dreamed?
In the moment, you're frustrated, you're disappointed, you're saddened. Usually, and we talked about this off camera a little bit, usually you have an idea of when your career is coming to an end. They had no idea. And that part's very troubling for someone who's been in their position before. Having some power of perspective, if not playing a sport is the worst thing that happens in someone's life, life's still going to be okay. It's really, really hard to say that in the moment. It's still hard for me to even say that with perspective sitting here right now, because I know how much work all of our student athletes have put in to their respective sport, and to have it stripped away, it's not even, is it not ideal? In that context, in their world, it's very cruel, and I recognize that, and I wish we could have all come out with something different. But again, I think you have to, as the dust begins to settle, and as we begin to understand the gravity of this health crisis, sport is just such a small microcosm of the big picture. And it's going to take some longer to realize that than others.
All right. Let's move forward now.
Sure.
I still have some questions with regard to that, but I want to move forward to the big picture, so to speak. How much have you been in on the conversation, the decision-making with regard just to Auburn University and closing the doors here and going to online instruction following the spring break, and then athletics role with regard to that at this point?
Right. Well, from a university perspective, the institution has been having this discussion for several weeks now, and so it's not a surprise that academically we arrived at where we arrived. And we are an extracurricular activity in the grand scheme of things, right? It comes with a lot more responsibility, but at the end of the day, we're an extracurricular activity. And so our responsibility as an athletics department is to fall in line with the university. Our student athletes are students first and athletes second. So it was more about, okay, if the university is going to do this, then how do we manage that? And what does that mean for us? And there are still some questions out there that need to be answered. Lots of questions, actually, that need to be answered. But just thinking about our responsibility, and again, I have a little bit different perspective because I've been in Nashville for the past 3 days. I got home at about 10:30 last night, and the commissioner got home this morning as we were on our conference call. And so we've been hyper-focused on our student athletes, their health and safety and their well-being, and being responsible citizens, knowing that we're responsible for not only student athletes, not just coaches, but our staffs as well, and their families. And so it's not just my wife and my 3 kids, I'm thinking about you, I'm thinking about everybody. And so we have to really work hard to elevate our consciousness and not just focus on the smaller details of playing sport.
Your message to the folks that work in this athletic department, the folks that you lead, what is your message to them right now?
I was sitting in my hotel room on Thursday night, just exhausted after several conference calls, several phone calls, just continuing to process what was going on and understanding that they needed to hear from me, but yet not quite knowing what to say. This is just, we've used the term unprecedented. It's unprecedented. It's uncharted waters, and there's no manual on how to lead manager through this. But I just tried to pour my heart out to try to capture what has been happening these past few days, but also to let them know that they have a responsibility as well to their colleagues, to the people whom they serve, and to their families, and to make sure that, I use the term, I think, conscientious citizens. We all have to be really thoughtful, and no longer is it about Andy Burcham and your ability to come to work or to work from home, or the lack of your ability made to get groceries or needs, but it's everybody's ability and the impact on everybody in our community and beyond with regards to the health crisis that we're experiencing now. So trying to offer some consistency, some raw thoughts and candid thoughts, but also some expectations as we continue to move forward in an ever-changing environment.
Your office overlooks Sanford Stadium, Hitchcock Field at Plainsman Park on a gorgeous weekend where we thought that there would be plenty of activity. The start of the Southeastern Conference season against Texas A&M. And while the games have halted, the business of the athletic department moves forward. So how does that move forward? What does that look like?
What does it look like? I don't know. You talk to your coaches and they're like, "Oh, what do we do?" So much of our lives are consumed by the events that happen here on campus and off campus. And some of the staff and I were talking a couple weeks ago about how busy it is and helping people understand that this literally is the busiest time of year for everyone in the athletics department. Responsibilities are spread out all the time, and when those vanish or are suspended, what do we do? There isn't a shortage of work, but everybody's work is adjusted just a little bit. And so part of my responsibility will be to help our senior leadership team identify what our priorities are so that these next few weeks we can continue to make progress in some of the longer range versions or longer range items that we need to accomplish. And there may be some cleanup that we need to do right now while we can. So there'll still be some administrative stuff that happens behind the scenes, just not to the degree that we're accustomed to.
How will that work be done? Physically, how will the work be done?
Yeah, well, so we've got a great executive team who have managed while I was dealing with kind of these other issues that were emerging. Our staff back on campus was really focusing and drilling in on the operational aspect of our enterprise. And so letting people know that they can work remotely, they should work remotely. I think the K-12 decision to keep kids out of school has had an impact on us. And so no different than our coaches have to do as they go through the course of a game. They've got to pivot, they've got to audible, they've got to change philosophy from what they thought they were going to be able to do. We're in the same process, and I'm very thankful to all of our staff who are understanding that we're making the best decisions that we can with the information that we have, and we'll continue to do so with everybody's health, safety, and well-being as a top priority.
What have your conversations with the head coaches been like, especially those that have been directly affected here in this winter and the spring season?
Well, and I would argue they're all directly affected in some shape or capacity, right? Some of them more seriously than others, but our coaches all are here to serve our athletes. And although one of their priorities is to win in competition. Their main priority is to win in life and to help our student athletes win in life. And this, I think, it's a shocking reality, number one, and getting over that shock of the path that we have gone down catches everybody a little bit differently. Accepting then obviously the reality of where we are, and then thinking about the future and turning things into not woe is me, but how can I be of help. And our coaches have been incredibly understanding, incredibly helpful in sharing their thoughts with me so that I can then share them with our league to help us drive decisions that we made. But more importantly, it's just they need to hear what's going on, and they need to understand why we're doing what we're doing, and that's part of why you and I are here today.
What are the instructions to the student athletes?
Stay safe, and that means various things for various student athletes. But stay safe. Be thoughtful with what you're doing, with your hands, with your face. Being just cleanliness is one of the most important things they can do. But we also find ourselves in a unique spot where some of our student athletes were at home or somewhere for spring break. Some of our student athletes were preparing for competition. Some of them were here on campus. Some of them were elsewhere. And so the first thing we need to do was just kind of huddle them as teams to help them understand the severity of what's going on. And now it's about trying to figure out the best way to keep them safe. One of the things that is incredibly challenging to navigate is their passions for sport. They want to play, and they don't care, in theory, if they're not playing in front of anybody. And they want to practice, right? They're champions, is who they are, and that's part of their fabric. That's not the safest thing to do, unfortunately. And so as we talk with all of our colleagues, they're sending kids home. Go home, go somewhere, get away from campus, and focus on your studies.
There's a lot of diversity with regard to the student athletes on campus, and some, quite frankly, can't get home. It's much tougher for some student athletes, the international student athletes, to get home. What accommodations are being made for those student athletes and just international students on the Auburn campus?
Right. Well, I think we're very fortunate in the fact that our university has taken great measures to ensure that all students are safe, but in particular our international students who don't really have a place to go, and making accommodations for them here in Auburn.
With the Southeastern Conference mandate shutting down athletic events and practices through mid-April, that certainly affects spring football at Auburn and the A-Day game, which was scheduled for April 11th. What provisions, if any, are being taken for that to move forward?
It's a great question. It's funny to think that on either Tuesday or Wednesday, we were shutting down things until March 30th. And then a day later, we now extended it an additional 2 weeks. It's incredibly uncertain right now with where we're heading, particularly as it relates to A-Day and all of our student athletes and their activities. So we're going to take it day by day and continue to evaluate the landscape and the broader health crisis and try to figure out what we do from there. But it's a little too early to tell what we're going to do with regards to A-Day.
Back to the tournament for a moment. That's a great deal of lost revenue for the NCAA when it comes to especially March Madness. What kind of impact will that have, or could that have, with regard to Auburn University and specifically Auburn athletics?
Sure. That's an excellent question. I think that the NCAA is still trying to sort out their position as it relates to insurance. But I will also tell you that financially, a lot of the discussion on the front end, I'm sure, had to deal with not only finances, but our fans look so forward to this time of year. This is one of the best times of year in all of sport. And so trying to preserve that experience for our fans and for our student athletes was really, really important on the front end. And I have to imagine that the reality started to set in that health and safety is much more important than the mighty dollar. So we're still undetermined on how it will have an impact on what it is that we do here locally.
It could, though, have an impact on just how the athletic department operates. Would you agree?
It is possible.
Yeah.
It is possible.
Okay.
But we're not sure yet.
All right. Here's my selfish question
Okay.
for you.
Shoot.
Is there any hope, is there any chance that spring sports could still be saved in some diminished measure?
Right. Those conversations, I know we in our room with our peers had those conversations starting Thursday. They continued on Friday, and they continued this morning. And they'll continue until we have a resolution. Part of the challenge is we don't know what tomorrow brings. We don't know what tonight brings. And we don't know what the next 2 weeks bring. So it's hard to determine too far out what's going to happen when we're not even quite sure what's happening at an arm's length away.
When you say we, you're talking Southeastern Conference, or are you talking Auburn
I would
University?
Southeastern Conference, and I can speak to that the best because those are the conversations I've been in. But as you hear from our commissioner, and he's having conversations with his colleagues, it's incredibly uncertain, and I would even argue that it's doubtful.
For those seniors, especially in the spring sports, that all of a sudden, though, that senior is done, and maybe they've played a third of their season, and they had hopes of Oklahoma City or Omaha or the NCAA golf championships. Is there talk at this point of giving them an additional year of eligibility if they choose that?
Sure. I would say there's lots of talk about it. We're now that some of the impactful decisions have been made and very complicated decisions have been made, we start to find ourselves looking toward the future, and that is a very hot topic amongst, I'm sure, student athletes and amongst those of us who are practitioners. There's lots of challenges with that blanket eligibility, and I would also say that eligibility isn't necessarily even limited to just the seniors. Every student athlete has been impacted in some way, shape, or fashion. What impact does that have then on next year and the years after that? And those are the questions that we all have to put our heads together and really be thoughtful about as we try to determine what the most appropriate path is.
The impact on the incoming freshmen, the impact on scholarship limits, all has to be, I guess, talked about.
It's true, yeah. And there's several dynamics involved. Some of them are at the national level, some of them are at the conference level, and honestly, some of them are at the local level. And we haven't, I don't think, given adequate thought at this point to be able to provide a thoughtful answer on where we go moving forward.
All right. Your message to the Auburn family.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your understanding as things have evolved. I ran into some people when we were in Nashville on Wednesday night, and they were obviously very disappointed. Some of them had driven, some of them had flown, and they wanted to watch basketball. And it's amazing how quickly perspective changes as information comes in and as the gravity of circumstances around us occur, that you have to pivot from your original position. So I think people went from anger and disappointment to understanding. And when the NBA paused on their season, that was a wake-up call. And I think the unique thing for sport, whether it be at the college level or at the professional level, it's got a unique place in our society. People are incredibly passionate about sport. It's the constant binder, if you will. And so when we don't have it, we all feel empty. And we want it back. Everybody wants it back. Mm-hmm. But the health and safety of the people in our country, the people across the world, is plenty important enough. And sport, at some point in time, will come back and fill our hearts again and our passions again. I'm thankful for the Auburn family and their understanding. I'm thankful for our student athletes who have handled this in such a mature fashion. I don't think enough credit goes to our student athletes. I've only had the chance to speak face to face with our basketball players on the bus before they headed back to Auburn. We just apologized. There are things that are beyond our control. This one happens to be significant, but this won't be the first time that things happen to all of us that it's beyond our control. I'm sad. I really am. We're here to support young people. And it's difficult when you're not able to do that. But I do, Andy, I appreciate the opportunity to kind of sit down and talk about some of these issues. It's actually been therapeutic to sit down and talk, for me personally, to just sit and talk about these things. And I hope it's been somewhat beneficial for our student athletes, our staff, and our fans, because communication has been incredibly challenging in these past few days.
I look forward to the day when it returns.
You and me both.
War Eagle.
War Eagle.